In this discussion, we're going to take a look at cognitive development as it occurs in adolescence. So we're going to first take a look, at the process by which egocentrism, kind of tends to, which occurs in younger age groups, tends to diminish a little bit and moves toward abstract logic. And that usually occurs, between ages 11 and 18. And here are some of the reasons, some of the causes, or factors that contribute to this phase of development. Things like brain maturation, intense conversation, schooling, moral challenges, and increased independence. Now, egocentrism isn't, completely gone, by this phase of development. As a matter of fact, we refer to the term imaginary audience, and that is adolescent egocentrism. And that usually occurs, between the ages of 10 to 13. And those, who are experiencing this, they intend to, tend to think about themselves and what other people think of them a little more intensely at this age. And so they also think of themselves as, maybe being a little more unique, special, and admired or disliked than they actually are. And that's all this type of thinking that tends to lead to interpretation of everyone else's behavior as a personal judgment on themselves. So just be aware of that. Now, a couple of different fables, that are, might not be logical, though, that tend to occur in this phase of development are our personal fable. And that's just the belief, that, that one's own thoughts, feelings, experiences, they're unique, and that they tend to be a little more wonderful or awful than anyone else's. That's personal fable. Now, the invincibility fable, that refers to the fact, that adolescents, they tend to think that that they're untouchable, that they cannot be overcome or even harmed by anything that might defeat a normal mortal or person, such as unprotected sex, drug abuse, high-speed driving. Now, these are generalizations. Not every, individual experiences this, but just definitely be aware of this at this phase of development. Okay. Now, those you may remember from previous type discussions that we have discussed Piaget and his use of the term formal operational thought. Okay, and that was the fourth and final stage of cognitive development, according to Piaget, and so that is characterized by systematic logic and the ability to think about abstract ideas. So I put a few examples here for you here, like say mathematical type reasoning, social type reasoning, scientific type reasoning. I highly recommend, you pause the video and definitely take a look at this, for your own further insight. Now we're going to take a look, at hypothetical thought and reasoning. So what does hypothetical thought refer to? That just means reasoning that, uses propositions and possibilities, and they might not reflect reality. So that's the type of thinking, that one, might engage in when one says, well, what would happen, if this occurred, and then what would I do? What would be my response? That's hypothetical type thought. So definitely that, starts to increase at this age and phase of development. And then there are two types of reasoning, and that we'll talk about right here, deductive and inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning, that just means reasoning from general statements, starting to use logic, looking at all the, aspects of that, and then moving toward eventually a specific type thought. which is what, like say detectives do. They'll take a look at the big picture, and then eventually they'll narrow it down through logical thinking to, basically, like, well, who done it? Who did this? Or how did this occur? So that's deductive reasoning. Okay, inductive reasoning, on the other hand, that's the opposite. That means moving from specifics and then eventually leading to a general conclusion. So just know that those two types of terms, what they refer to, deductive and inductive. Here, I just recommend that you pause the video, read this, just think about this. This might even be something, that might be, worth discussing in discussion forums or something. Okay, so what is intuition, versus analysis? So more specifically, what is intuitive thought versus analytic thought? So intuitive thought, that just, is a type of thinking, that can be arise more from an emotion or a hunch. It's not, it's beyond rational explanation. And, it's usually influenced by past experience, and even one's cultural type assumptions or experiences. Okay. On the other hand, analytical thought, that is more logic and rationality, thinking, through things, like pros and cons, risks and consequences, possibilities, facts, so that is analytic thought. So just be aware of the difference between these two types of thought. So definitely, the two modes of thinking, analytical versus intuitive. I'm going to back up, and I just want to have you be aware, though, that this doesn't infer that one is necessarily better than the other. We tend to, use these types of thinking constantly. And, we employ these modes of thinking throughout our days and our experiences. Okay, so I'm going to move forward here. I'm not going to elaborate on this any further. And so those two types of thinking, I just want to make you aware, right here, that those are known as dual processing. And so right here, we're gonna, this actually talks about the areas of the brain that that have to do with certain types of processing in the brain. Definitely, I recommend you pause the video here. I'm not going to elaborate on these, and I don't even think a lot of these terms are really necessary for memorization. Except for those who may be interested in pursuing, types of degrees in neuroscience or medical type degrees or something of that effect. Okay, so we're going to switch gears here and we're going to talk about digital natives. So what are digital natives? Today's, young people, teenagers and millennials, et cetera, et cetera. But they are, a lot more experienced with technology than say somebody who is in their, 50s and older, even in their 40s. So I just said, look, digital natives, they may have been, experienced with technology since childhood. But definitely, there were differences, and in some individuals, and especially because of, where they come from, culturally speaking and socioeconomically speaking. And so that refers to what's known as the digital divide. But the digital divide is starting to decrease, a little bit more as cultures and those, of socioeconomic status start getting access to types, but please be aware at least of these two factors right here. Okay, we're going to move on. And here I highly recommend, you just, pause and take a look at this, So, just especially this that I underlined, so egocentric type thinking, it decreases with education, conversation, and experience. So I asked this question, does technology and social networking, does that speed up or hamper this process right here? What do you think? This might even be, something to just, discuss, in the discussion forums. Okay, so moving on here. So technology and cognition. So technology has shown, to encourage rapid shifts of attention, multitasking without reflection, and visual learning instead of invisible analysis. So what do you think about that? What do you think about the, those claims there? Do you think that's true? That might be something to discuss as well. And so what do you think? Do you think, that technology, do you think that can actually be an addiction? Just for some of you, who are pursuing degrees in psychology and everything, that actually the DSM-5, did not include it as an addiction. Okay. But yet there are therapists, and everything who are claiming that it is an addiction. So what do you think? Okay, so what are the downsides, of experience in technology, and everything? One of those, can be cyberbullying. And so, definitely take a look at this on your own here. I'm not going to elaborate. A lot of you already are aware of what cyberbullying is, but just for those of you who want a little further insight, definitely pause and take a look at this. Okay, so a couple things, remember we discussed, adolescent imaginary audience? Well, that can actually occur, in the use of technology, like say social type, websites, texting, things like that. So just know that can occur. And so moving on. Okay, things can occur also, like sexting, and so here are the troubles, associated with that. Highly recommend that you pause and take a look at this on your own. All right, and we're going to shift gears here. We're just going to take a very quick look, at the type of, types of teaching and learning, education. So secondary education, that occurs, after primary education, so after elementary or grade school and before tertiary education, so which is college. So at this age group that we're discussing, here, teenage years, we're talking generally about secondary education. Usually occurs between ages 12 to 18. Okay. And, I put an important reminder right here, definitely the recognition, that educated adults, the advance national wealth and health. Okay, that's what political leaders say, so, so take a look at this, read this on your own, and, maybe think about this a little bit. And what do you think about that? Okay, here's what occurs during middle school. Okay, and I'm not going to elaborate on these. This is more for being familiarity less than memorization. Okay. So definitely during middle school years, many students, they seek peer acceptance. We discussed that a little bit earlier. Okay. And they tend to, when they have a hard time coping with middle schools, they might, blame others. Just be aware of that. Okay. And want to discuss these two terms. Now I moved forward here really quickly. You might have noticed I'm going to move backward here. That I skipped these terms right here. Entity approach to intelligence and the incremental approach to intelligence. Well, those are defined on the next slide right here. So entity approach, to intelligence, that means that one sees ability as innate. Okay. So it rejects the idea that effort enhances achievement. We're just born with intelligence. Okay, we have certain attributes. Okay, but on the other hand, the most common type of schooling that we are familiar with is what's known as incremental approaches to intelligence building. And so that means those who agree with this type of approach to intelligence as is intelligence, it's directly increased by effort. And that suggests that children can master whatever they seek to learn if they pay attention, participate in class, study, and complete their homework. That is incremental approach to intelligence. And that is the most common type of schooling that we're familiar with. Now, definitely, entering a new school, that can be, there might, some issues might be involved with that. That can affect, one's ability to function and learn. Definitely, the types of physical changes, the, hormonal changes that are occurring during that, might create stress when one is changing a school. And then definitely the first year in any new school, can, be correlated with increased bullying, decreased achievement, depression, eating disorders. So what do you think about that? Have you experienced any of that yourself, or do you have friends or family that have experienced that? And we're going to take a quick look at high school. So definitely, high school can be a little more college-bound type training, in general. And so teachers, they assume that students have mastered, formal types of thinking instead of, teaching, they're not responsible for teaching students how to do this anymore. They're just assuming that students have already mastered formal thinking. And definitely, definitely like tests and that types of thing, is really important. So, I asked this question here, do these tests work, and so I highly recommend you read this and then, think about how you might answer this question. And also on this here, this is just more for familiarity. I highly recommend you pause and just read through this here. Those, who do not go to college, why do they not go to college? What, might, influence that type of decision? Are there cultures, that facilitate that type of thinking, socioeconomic status, et cetera, et cetera. Also, one at this age, one might start thinking about, the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? One might hear that from one's family, the older people that one is involved with. So what do you think? Okay, so that concludes our discussion of this, and I highly recommend, once again, get out your study guides, answer questions that you may be able to answer from this video, And other questions that you're not able to answer, please refer to your textbooks. And we will take a look at the third and final chapter in this phase of development in the next video.